All right, welcome. Welcome to my close friends, and welcome most graciously to Channel 7. I appreciate you coming out here as I begin this 25-hour speech. It's a little bit difficult at this point to fathom where I'll be in 25 hours, where my voice will be, for one, where I'll be mentally. But I know where my friends will be. My friends will be right here in this room with me. And after all, they wouldn't be my friends if they weren't. So let me start it all by saying thank you to you guys, and thank you for Dave for setting things up. It has made this possible. There's no way I could have done this in a room alone. 25 hours is a long time, so I'm going to excuse myself. Rather, I'll probably encourage myself to be repetitive and to rant. I've been told by my father that this should be called something more of the conservative tirade rather than 25-hour speech. I don't know. We'll see if that prediction actually comes true. But one thing's for sure. I'm going to stand strong behind my podium here with my future alma mater flag in front of me. And unfortunately, what we had hanging behind me, our American flag, which we had to remove because of certain bureaucratic restraints. We'll address that at some point in the extemporaneous portion. For now, I'll give a brief overview of exactly how the speech is going to go. If you have any questions, it qualifies for me to yield to questions as part of the speech, so feel more than willing to answer any at all. Oh, you can just stick it up there? Okay. I have a 100-page outline here. This is what I've affectionately named the hundo, for the 100 topics that are contained therein. It's an outline because it will be an extemporaneous presentation, what I'm doing. An outline of 100 topics. I have on government, the Constitution, on and the people. I have on history. I have on modern politics and contemporary elections. I have on history of elections. I have on my particular opinions. I have on my life and experiences. All things that I'll be covering throughout the day and throughout the night. Luckily, we have amazing resonance in this room, or as my friend John Adler would call it, resonation in this room. So I'll be able to speak relatively comfortably without a microphone and hopefully be heard. As it gets dark in here, I'll be able to flip on this light. Causes a little bit of a shadow, but what's the difference of a shadow over 25 hours? If there are any questions in the beginning, then I'd be happy to field them. If not, then I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to cover a little bit of extemporaneous material, and then I'm going to save that for when we have many more people coming, probably later in the day, after school ends, stuff like that. There's a small crowd now, to say the least. Yes?
Can we answer questions now?
Of course.
Wonderful. Okay. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Did you have to... We don't want you to...
Not at all.
Just too long.
Shoot them right at me. Be more than willing to answer now than in the middle, I'd say.
All right. Well, first of all, can you tell us some of the rules? Do you know any of the rules? How long can you pause for? Are you allowed to leave?
Well, there are certain physical occurrences which I'm sure may drag me away from the podium if necessary, but I can tell you that I'm going to make every attempt not to leave the podium. I'm certainly not going to sit down throughout the entire time. I'm not going to stop talking for any longer than a normal break within a sentence or a transcript would require. I won't stop for an extended period, for sure. I have some water in my aid. I think my mom made me some sandwiches. But if you knew anything about my mom or what happened in our kitchen, then it wouldn't be the most promising proposition to eat those sandwiches. It's the worst of the worst. Don't put that on the air, if that's okay. So the rules are I can read. I have a few selected books over here, and I have some of the best speeches from American history in those black binders. I can read from there. Most of the speech will be extemporaneous from this outline I have here, covering basically every topic that I can think of. It's about 100 topics. And that's about it. It's going to all be recorded on this laptop up here so that we can send it in for verification. And hopefully at the end, at 25 hours, if I haven't collapsed and my legs haven't given out, then we will have broken the world record. The rules are based very loosely off the Senate filibuster rules, which Strom Thurmond currently holds the record for, going 24 hours during a filibuster, I believe, back in the 1960s.
Okay, so I was going to say, do you have any idea right now who holds the record and how long that is?
We believe the record is at 24 hours right now. We know that no one of my age has ever done anything like this, so it's definite that this will be a world record for someone who's 18. In regards to the longest speech ever, we've seen a few reports of people who've spoken for 32 hours, but that includes walking and traveling and stopping and stuff like that. We had someone who went for 36 hours, but that was an after-dinner speech, and he could sit down. If I could sit down, I'd give myself at least another 24 hours, at a minimum. So we're gonna hope that for now, given the format that we have, given my age and given exactly what I'm doing, that it qualifies as a world record. Not a world record, then at least a personal accomplishment.
How long did it take you to prepare? What did you have to do?
I was hoping that it wouldn't take too long to prepare, but it took me several hours. I wanted to make sure that when I got up here, I wouldn't go mute and run out of things to say. So I outlined it. Basically, every topic I could think of, and within that topic, every subtopic I could think of, and within that subtopic, I outlined every point, every perspective that I could think of. For purposes of full disclosure, I am very much what one could consider a political conservative. So in a lot of ways, this will contain those ideas. But most of this is not at all ideological. Most of it is not partisan at all. Most of it is just my thoughts and views on mostly non-controversial topics and some controversial topics. That took a while to prepare that outline. Choosing the books to read was easy. I knew exactly what I wanted to cover in that regard, and choosing the speeches was easy. I knew exactly what I wanted to read in that regard from the start. So.
What made you want to do this?
Well, it was a mix of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and his filibuster that lasted a day, as he put it, in pursuit of those lost causes, the only causes worth fighting for. It's a sense of the strong oratorical history we have in this country. Far too often people forget that the greatest orators in the history of man have come from the United States. And we need to pay that recognition, and we need to make sure that we continue in that tradition. A sense of history has inspired us, but also a recognition that we need more political discourse from our younger people in this country. We need more youth involvement, and that means more than showing up to polling stations because you want to get your community service hours. It means really getting engaged in the topics. And if I can bring out a couple of local news stations just in this area by doing this, hopefully we can make enough of an impact where some others might want to pick up in this trend.
So is this preparation for your entrance into politics then?
I wouldn't go that far. My mother has warned me that after spending 25 hours behind a podium, I might not ever want to go back. I don't really find that likely. But if I could ever bring some more truth or integrity to the system, then it'd be something that I'd be interested in doing. Right now, I'm just looking to get through to the point where the sun goes down and has come back up, and I'm still standing behind the podium. Then I'll worry about what I'm doing 20, 25 years down the line after that.
So you said you're interested in politics, but is that what made you want to set a record? What made you want to set a world record for speaking?
I'd say it's a mix of my interest in politics and a little bit of temperament. I don't really do anything half-heartedly, so if I'm going to give a speech, well, why not make it a long speech? And if I'm going to deliver a long speech, well, why not just break a world record? And I guess that's what the real motivation was. I started off wanting to go 24 hours like Mr. Smith, and also like Strom Thurmond. I think that the filibuster in the Senate is one of the best symbols of the open debate we have in this country, the open dialogue, and the importance of deliberation in making decisions in a republic such as ours. And that was really the motivation to get started.
So did you graduate from high school yet?
Nope. I graduated in 1 month, or what are we? Be a couple days less than a month, June 24th. So about a month. It'll be June 24th, and we'll be done for good. Hopefully this sends me out with a bang and some wind in my sails. Just for a little bit of reference, I'm heading to Georgetown next year, and I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't undertake anything like this without paying some respect to my future alma mater right here. So we've got the flag there. You can see it's probably going to come undone a couple times. We'll rehang it. And that's why this is here, if you were wondering.
And so what do your friends think? What do your schoolmates think about you doing this?
Well, there's a diversity of opinions. Some think that I won't do it, they're here. Some think that I can do it, they're here as well. And most think that I won't be able to be standing for 25 hours. Most of them stay back home. I think that I have some very supportive friends. These guys here. It means more than anything to have them here for this entire 25 hours, even though they have informed me they won't be paying attention for more than an hour of it. Just having them here means a lot to me. And knowing that they're supporting me will carry me through the 25 hours. If there was any doubt that I'd get this done before, I know that I'll get it done now that they're here to support me. But I have those friends who are dissenters. I was hoping at first to follow in the mold of George Bush and thrive on lower expectations. It's always easier to prove people wrong than to prove them right. But unfortunately, I found quite a few people who think I can do it. So I haven't exactly had that fire lit under my belly. We're going to see if Mr. Twain can do that for me.
And have you always been a talker?
Have I always been a talker? I guess that depends on who you ask. A few of my teachers would confirm for you that I have been. I think that speaking has been always something that has always motivated me, always inspired me. First real speaker that I really heard was Bill Clinton. Not a big supporter of Mr. Clinton, but he was a brilliant orator. George Bush followed him. While not the best speaker, certainly with some of the best speech writers, and I was picked up from there. I remain loyal to Daniel Webster and Ronald Reagan, my contemporary and I guess you can say historical favorite orators. But I've always believed that words can make a difference. And that sounds cliche, but it's a good thing that sounds cliche. It sounds cliche because people said it enough that it's starting to make a difference. Words can make a difference. I believe in that, and from that flows my passion for oratory.
So what's your biggest fear while you're doing this?
My biggest fear would have to be that I run dry on things to say. I'd like to believe that I have 25 hours worth of material in here, because 25 hours worth of material in here would confirm that I have 25 hours worth of commentary and opinions in my head. I'd like to think I have at least that amount. I think I do, and if I need a little bit of diversification, then I'll turn to some of the reading that I have. I have to be totally honest in that I just don't have any fears. I'm confident that I can do this. I'm confident that I have the backing here of a couple of guys who will help me do this. And at the end of it, it will have been worth it, and the hard work will have been worth it. And whatever fears associated, well, you just have to reason that it wouldn't be worth it if it wasn't just a little bit scary. It just wouldn't be worth it.
All right, we sound good. Sound like a politician to me.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Any other questions?
No, that's it. Good luck.
Thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. And we got started at about 9:15. I see that I'm 15 minutes into it. That is exactly 1% of the amount of time I was We're really making progress here. That being said, let me thank Channel 7 for coming out. I'll start with my contemporaneous speaking. We'll see how that goes for a little bit, and then maybe we'll Joel welcome, and then maybe we'll switch to some reading, just because I want to make sure that I maintain for as long as I can a strong extemporaneous presentation for those who will be coming later. My first topic here is the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I'll save for after our news coverage has left actually reading the Constitution, because it's something that I wanted to do, and discuss the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the abstract for just a little while. I believe strongly, I have not a doubt in my mind that the Constitution is the most brilliant document ever written, and that goes back again to something that might sound a little cliche, but cliche for good reason. Things become cliche because people say them often, and if people are saying them often, hopefully that's because there's a little bit of truth and reliability behind them. The important part about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is really not the government it creates. The important part about the Constitution is the government that it doesn't create. The fact that we've synthesized in this country a limited government, a government with restraints. I was reading the Russian Constitution a couple of weeks ago, and then I took a look at the German Constitution, and becoming more and more interested, took a look at the Canadian Constitution. And what you find about these constitutions is they're these beautiful documents of law and governance that tell the citizens what they can do. They grant their citizens rights. And it's important that you have a constitution that grants its citizens rights, a government that grants its citizens rights. But the United States Constitution doesn't do that. The United States Constitution is alone in that its people grant rights to the government. Its people grant the rights to the government. We don't have a constitution where the government tells the people what they can do. We have a government where the people tell our politicians what they can do. It goes back to that old saying that people shouldn't fear their government. Government should fear its people. And that's what our Constitution succeeds in. We have an ideal government, and that it's one that doesn't grant rights to the people, but the people grant rights to it. At the same time, we have an evolving understanding of our Constitution. Now, I happen to be an originalist. I happen to believe in a strict, reasonable interpretation of the Constitution, and I think it's important to recognize in a day when all too many people want to claim that the Constitution is just simply something that we make of it. When all too many people want to claim that the Constitution is nothing but what a bunch of judges can say that it means. It's important to remember that there was an original intent in what was written on the parchment those few special weeks. There was an original idea of how our government should work, and no matter how society changes, and no matter how our feelings and opinions and interpretation of events and occurrences around us change, the Constitution has some basic principles that will not change. And though it's an evolving document, it's an evolving document because of the amendment process we had in place to change it. Not because we can take our own liberties, no pun intended, with the Constitution and its interpretation. As I can see it, there were three basic goals that the framers saw in a federal government. There were three basic services that government provided. And those three basic principles, those three basic motivations, should be the foundation upon which all governance takes place. No more and no less. To defend liberty, to protect life, and to defend the people. I think that it's important to remember that anything not in the Constitution is technically not within the rights of our federal government to do. Any power that the federal government would assume needs to be explicitly outlined in our Constitution, or it can't be utilized. And as such, all we need in controlling what is today a sprawling out of control federal government is to go back to those three basic principles: defend liberty, protect life, and defend the people. Defend the people. Now, I'll move a little bit more quickly than I was originally intending to, only because I want to keep things somewhat exciting and not quite as monotonous here in the beginning. But I've already talked briefly about the idea that the most important part about the Constitution is that it's a document which makes sure that people tell the government what it can do, not a government telling its people what they can do. And what that really means is limited government. Limited government that doesn't tell people how to live. Like I said, my problem in most cases with the fringes of liberalism or conservatism, not to tell people how to live, that people will live their lives on their own terms. That's an important part of limited government, that we have a federal government which knows its limits and will not start to encroach upon those rights of the people. That we have a sense in this country that the most important facet of our society, the center of our society, is the individual, not the government. Ronald Reagan said once the most important question in every election is not in regards to any specific policy, not in regards to any specific position, not in regards even to foreign affairs, not in regards to anything other than the one question of whether we will live our lives as we choose, or whether we will send to Washington a group of people who we would consider to be an elite to run our lives for us. The most important thing we have in this country is the right to live on our own terms. And far too often that gets turned into or spun into a conservative talking point. It is not. We need to remember that the most important thing we have here is our individual liberty. And I'd like to talk for a second about that individual liberty and how it relates to the Constitution, because individual liberty, as people seem to forget too much, but as we can never, ever forget, individual liberty is much more than our right to burn a flag. And I happen to believe, and I'll get to this later, that is a right, though it's a discussion of use of one of those liberties. It's not within the most important liberties in the Constitution that we pick up a phone and there's no chance that a federal agent trying to protect our people from terrorism isn't listening in. There are some very basic freedoms here that people seem to forget. Ownership. Where is the ownership in the United States? We're losing it day by day by day, but the framers, and it's obvious in the Constitution, it's even more obvious in the Declaration of Independence, the framers saw as our most important right the right to ownership. The right to look at a piece of land and say, that's mine, and the government can't take it from me. The right to look at things your family owns and say, that's mine, the government can't take it, and when I'm gone, I can pass that to my kids, and the government can't take that either. Ownership. We have a crisis of ownership in this country, and we can't forget how important that is to our Constitution. There's a lot in the Constitution in regards to the right to bear arms, and I don't want to dive too deeply into it, but I think that another one of the most important ideas added to the Constitution afterwards is the right to bear arms, and I think that it walks hand in hand, though not obviously, with the idea of ownership. The Bill of Rights makes very clear that citizens have the right to bear arms. Now, there's been within this school of thought, which has taken hold over the past 50 years that we have an evolving Constitution, there's been a few liberties taken with the Second Amendment. People seem to believe that just because when it was originally written, it was intended for organized militias, that it's okay to basically shred up that amendment, that it's okay to tell people, well, slowly we're going to remove gun rights. But just like ownership, the founders believed that the right to bear arms was one of the most important rights that we had. Because if the government got out of control, and I know this sounds unreasonable nowadays, but it's not. If the government got out of control, if the government turned on its own people, then its own people could shoot back. And while that sounds odd, it's something that's important because we can never forget that governments can grow out of control. And only governments that are restrained, both by their own limitations, but also by personal steps taken by private citizens, only then can governments be restrained, both in the ballot box, but in more extreme situations when we have our own means of defense. But more importantly, maybe not more importantly, maybe just as importantly, as being able to defend yourself against a government is to be able to defend ourselves against each other. There's no way in a free society to make sure that everyone uses guns correctly. There's no way to ensure in a free society that everyone uses anything correctly or ever acts in the way that we would all deem to be appropriate or just. But we need to remember that no government has a right to tell us how we can defend our families. No government has a right to tell us how we can defend ourselves. Now, of course, there's a reasonable interpretation of the Constitution which would outlaw Mike from having a nuclear weapon in his backyard. There's a reasonable interpretation of the Constitution which would keep Trump from that coveted assault rifle which he's trying to get his hands on. But at the same time, there is no reasonable interpretation of the Constitution which would dictate that we can't bear arms if we find it necessary and proper to defend ourselves, our freedom, and our families. and no radical or evolving interpretation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights can change that. I know I'm kind of jumping around here with that because I'm excited. We know how exciting constitutional law can be, but also important, also inherent in our Constitution is the idea of states' rights and federalism. States' rights and federalism. The idea that when this country was founded, it was not just a giant federal government. When this country was founded, it wasn't even a direct democracy or a democracy at all. We use democracy in an abstract way to dictate what we would like to call our government, but what we really are is a republic. A republic of smaller states that have come together to form a larger nation. And we can never forget that the founders originally intended for those states, the governments of those states, to be just as close to the people. To be just as close to the people as the federal government, if not more so. The rationale was always that the only way to truly restrain a government, the only way to truly restrain a government which has such control, which exercises such unlimited sovereignty over its people, is to restrain it through conflict. Now, we'll see that when I get into a little bit later the three branches of government and the conflict between those three branches, the push and pull between the three branches, which limits what the federal government can do. But we see it also in the struggle between states and the federal government. And that struggle is just so important to the system of government that we have. Without that struggle, there's nothing to restrain any person, any party, from taking complete and absolute control. And let us not forget that it's the state governments that provide a diversity in governance. It's state governments which are closest to the people, which are most responsive to the people. And it's state governments where, in our founders' minds, we were supposed to put most of our trust. Let us not forget that before we had this amazing, almost God-inspired, it may seem, document called the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation. And while the Articles of Confederation failed, let us not forget the reason for it in the first place and the important lessons that we learned from the Articles of Confederation, because while we learn today in history class that the Articles of Confederation failed, in a lot of ways they succeeded. Because it made clear that never again in this country would there be a strong enough federal government to override the sovereign power of the states. And while we had a supreme central government such that order could be ensured and such that unity could be assured, that we never had a federal government such that we wouldn't have state governments to restrain it. Continuing with principles of the Constitution. And I see that Mike already looks even more bored than he did in Mr. Burns' American History class. You know, Mike, I didn't think he could look even worse, but I see that it was somewhat hypocritical of me to criticize Mr. Burns as much as I did. I see that it's somewhat unavoidable at the time when talking about the Constitution.
Will you give us a question?
Of course.
Why not you tell us a story about how you and Mike ran away in New York City? I think now's a good time for that.
Well, okay. I have a lot of time, so maybe I'll just jump around a little bit. All right. There's a lot of personal experiences that we all have that have helped make us who we are. And this might actually be interest the guests we have here. You asked me about what inspired me to do this. Well, a little story which might give you a little insight into who I am and a personal favorite for you. Thank you for bringing it up, Jordan. That has just the trace of humiliation that I needed. When I think it was before our sophomore year, I was getting really into the presidential election taking place in 2004. Felt very strongly that George Bush should be reelected for a couple of reasons that I'll get to much later. But I decided that on the eve of the Republican convention, I just couldn't be anywhere else. I had to be there. I had to be at that Constitution so full of energy and passion and excitement all of those speakers and all of those people, everyone there for such a common cause, and everyone there to circle the wagons and rally our constituents, mobilize our political armies, sending off the party, hopefully, to what would be a victory. Well, I didn't have tickets. That didn't seem to bother me. I was in Buffalo while the convention was being held in New York City. Funny enough, that didn't seem to bother me either. And as Mike, who became my companion in this trip, will later attest to, I didn't really have a place to stay either. We figured we could sleep on a park bench while one of us would stay awake while the other one slept, and we could alternate throughout the night. How bad could it be? Well, it didn't seem that bad, and it certainly seemed promising enough that we hopped on a couple bikes, rode down to the subway station at UB, and got on the subway and took it downtown. Got downtown, we still had our bikes on us. I guess we didn't really plan this enough, did we, Mike? We bought giant boxes and assembled our bikes and put them in boxes. I know that's hard to probably visualize, but we stuck those boxes underneath the Greyhound bus, and we were off. We were on our way to New York City to see the Republican convention. Mike had kind of a funny quip. He would later mention that our trip to New York City, or what we hoped would be a trip to New York City, was somewhat of an urban triathlon involving biking, subway riding, and bus riding. Well, you know, our plans were all well and good. I'm not even going to go as far as to say it was a vast mistake that we didn't plan where we were going to stay, that we didn't plan for the fact that we didn't have tickets for the convention. The worst part would probably be that our parents had no idea we were going. Right? That was probably the worst part of the plan. And I think that I've learned since that it's important that I don't allow my enthusiasm to become zealotry. But when our parents found out that we were on our way to the GOP convention, we were somewhere in Utica, I believe, and Mike got the call first, I got the call next, and they made pretty clear that there was no way we were going to make it out, we were going to turn around immediately. It ended up being somewhat of an embarrassing story for a while, but then I came to thinking, maybe we just need a few more teenagers who are that excited about the political process, who are that inspired by our leaders today, who are that devoted to what is the most important process that we have, elections and electoral politics. Maybe we just need a few teenagers who are that excited that they hop on a bus and they ride out to New York City, even without their parents' consent. Now, I don't want this to be misconstrued. I see that the news is here, and I'm going to sound like I'm preaching disobedience and disorder here. But maybe we need a few more teenagers like me and like Mike who have that passion for what they're doing. And maybe your passion doesn't lie in a Republican convention. Maybe it lies at a seminar on aerospace. Maybe it lies on a convention for young business leaders, Jordan. Who knows? But what we need is more people with the kind of passion and enthusiasm for what they love that me might have. And a more educated, passionate electorate will lead to a more passionate, energized government, will lead to a more successful society. Is that good for your question?
Thank you, you answered it.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the question. I'd like to talk, moving out, expanding out from the Constitution and our government to really more basic principles of society in general, but still in regards to the Constitution. The idea that this country's most important entity is not its government. And people seem to forget that. What makes the United States is not its government, it's its people. And a government which recognizes that itself is not the most important part of our society is one that will remain the most restrained. I'll be moving here in a few minutes to a topic which I know Jordan will enjoy most, on capitalism in the United States. But remember always, and Mike's holding up the Atlas Shrugged, remember always that the government is only a small piece of what we have in this country. My absolutely favorite political speech ever given was by George H.W. Bush in 1988 at the RNC convention at the RNC in New Orleans, where he made this amazing statement about 1,000 points of light. 1,000 points of light coming together to form what we see as the United States, and remembering that at the center of those thousands of points of light, at the center was the individual. Only after you begin to radiate out from that center of the individual do you get to the point where you have governments. But before governments, you have communities. Before governments, you have churches, you have synagogues, you have schools, you have communities of people, which are so much more important. We tend to overvalue our government as it expands, when in fact we should be undervaluing it, I should say, and evaluating it with more detail as it expands, because we should be afraid of it as it expands, but never so afraid that we won't confront it. And I think that, in the end, is the most enduring principle of the Constitution. Well, that was one topic on my list of 100. And seeing as I've gone here for what looks like about 35 minutes, I think we're on pace to probably break the 25-hour period. What do you think? You'll be staying the whole 25 hours, of course. I'd like to move next to taxes. Taxes can be a huge topic, but it's one that I love to talk about. I know it's weird to find an 18-year-old who loves to talk about taxes, but it's weird because I was reinvigorated with this idea of taxes once I got my first paycheck from the dry cleaners. The dry cleaner, I mean, the federal government had the audacity, after I had sweated and labored for hours, hanging up clothes and tearing off tags and clearing out pockets and undoing buttons and redoing buttons and pressing clothing and folding clothing. The audacity to tell me, well, I'm going to take $17 of your profit. $17. You know what I could have done with that $17? I'm not even going to get into what I could have done with that $17. But I can tell you that I felt, for one, that the federal government and the state government had no right to take that much of my money. And I think when you approach the issue of taxes, you need to remember that that money is not the government's, it's the people's. And even if you're going to take it from the people for the ultimate benefit of the people, it's still the people's money. You wouldn't think, in today's day and age, that you have to make the case again and again and again for lower taxes. But you do. You need to stand atop the rooftops, as Walt Whitman told us, and scream at the top of your lungs, lower taxes, lower taxes, lower taxes. Because taxes are only a further manifestation of a government which has its hands all over the people, which has its foot right at the neck of the people. Because a government's right to tax is probably the most powerful ability that the government has. Let us not forget that it's interminably good for the economy to cut taxes, to remove restrictions, to make sure that money stays within the economy and not within the government. No country has ever survived, and indeed, for sure, no country has ever thrived when a government takes in more than 1/3 of that government, of that people's money for an extended period of time. Right now, we're well over 30%. We're well over 30%. And yet there's no outrage. And that puzzles me. Taxes keep going up and up and up. Well, with the exception of George Bush's tax cuts in 2001 and 2003, which should be applauded. But taxes keep going up. And not surprisingly, the government keeps expanding. Not surprisingly, we keep losing business in this country. Is it really that hard to understand for our tax and spend liberal friends in the Senate that cutting taxes helps the economy and raising taxes hurts it? Taxes are necessary, of course. But that's not the end of the story, because where they're placed and how high they are is a part of the debate. So where do we start cutting taxes? Well, for one, we cut the capital gains tax. We cut it lower and lower and lower until we ultimately phase it out. Phase out the capital gains tax. We were just talking about the crisis of ownership in this country. We need more owners. You know, in regards to tax policy, you hear a lot of calls, you hear a lot of screams, I should call it, much of which could be equivocated in my mind to class warfare. Tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. But you know what? People don't really support taxing the rich. Poll after poll after poll shows that people don't want to go out and tax the rich and tax the rich and tax the rich. I'm not rich. I don't want to tax the rich. Freed's rich. He doesn't want to tax the rich, but it's not because he's rich. And even if it is, there's nothing wrong with wanting lower taxes. I mean, you know, I didn't want $17 taken out of my paycheck. But people in this country don't want to tax the rich. They don't want to punish the rich. They want to be rich. And that's the most beautiful part about the American populace. We dare to dream big enough where we have a government, or hopefully a government reflective of a people, that doesn't dictate that they want the rich punished, but rather they want to be rich. They want to be rich. They want to get to that point where they're complaining about the high taxes on themselves. And let's not forget, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be taxing people of higher incomes. I mean, certainly we should. Indeed, the top 5% of this country right now, economically, in terms of affluence, the top 5% is funding near 40% of the government. 5% funding 40% of the government. I wouldn't exactly consider reducing that to be some sort of radical shift and some sort of betrayal of the lower classes. I don't know who else would. But after we cut the capital gains tax, we're going to see an influx of money into, welcome. How are you guys doing? We're going to see an influx of money into the stock market. What could be wrong with that? We're going to see more savings. We're going to see more investing. Rather than decrying the taxes that favor owners, let's make more people owners. Abraham Lincoln had a brilliant quote, which just is constantly in the back of my mind when discussing tax policy in this country, and it's that you don't figure out how to divide up the pie. Why is the government constantly trying to figure out how to divide up the pie? Why are we making the pie bigger? Why are we making the pie bigger rather than saying where we can cut 30% here, 40% there, where we can tax 70% there? Why are we making everybody richer? Because we have a government that can do that. We have a free society that can do that. We have a free society that has put into place a structure of social mobilization unlike what has ever been seen in history. And yet we seem to forget that again and again and again, and we continue to tax those who have been most successful. And while you tax those people, you don't burden those people with taxes which are unreasonable. Because it hurts the economy. It forces people out. And quite frankly, it helps us lose our edge, our competitive edge, when we have a government that can take money from us as quickly as we can make it. We need to stop penalizing our families. We need to make sure that we have a tax policy. Thank you so much for coming out.
We're not leaving yet.
Oh, you're not leaving yet? Okay. Well, welcome as well. We need to make sure that we have a tax policy which doesn't penalize our families. Why is it that you're paying higher taxes when you have children than when you don't? Why is it that you're not paying much lower taxes when you're married? If an inevitable outgrowth of government is that some of the policies will encourage or not encourage particular behaviors, why don't we have a tax policy that is pro-family? Why don't we have a tax policy that says if you have children, we're not going to punish you for it, we're going to celebrate you for it. If you get married and you make a commitment that will last for life, we're not going to punish you for it, we're going to celebrate that. Let's reform our tax code so that it says that, and most importantly, something I wanted to jump on it, and something that will apply to Free here in Dave, but hopefully only for a little while, is our tax on small business. We need to stop taxing our small businesses. If you want to go out and absolutely strip down the corporations, then I will cry at the top of my lungs for you not to do that. But no sooner than I will decry the taxes placed on small businesses. A little fact that people don't seem to recognize. 70% of the jobs in this country, 70%. Say it just one more time. 70% of the jobs in this country come from small business. Why would we be taxing small business at the rates we're taxing small business? At a time when Democrats are decrying and absolutely deploring what is considered to be a terrible unemployment rate, when in fact it's probably lower now than during the Clinton years, but at a time when people seem to be concerned with jobs, why would we be heavily taxing the one area of the economy which is providing 70% of the jobs? It doesn't make any sense. Lower the taxes on small business. And an important part of lowering the taxes on small businesses is to consider where we're taxing small businesses, because we tax commerce in this country and small businesses get hit there. But where small businesses get hit the worst is on the personal income tax. Most small business owners run their cash flow through their personal income. Most small business owners open up a private account which they use for themselves and their families, but which they also use for their business. Now, most of those people, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to say this, most of those small business owners make over $200,000 a year. And you're going to hear me get back to this number of $200,000 a year more and more and more, because it has been the campaign call of the Democrats for the past 8 years. And it was for the Republicans a little bit before that. $200,000 a year. Well, we need to get rid of the tax cuts for those making over $200,000 a year. Those making over $200,000 a year need to have their taxes raised again. Well, let's not forget, when we ponder such dangerous tax policy, that it is the small business owners who make up a great majority of those making over $200,000 a year. And when you attack through tax policy and an overburdens the government those people making over $200,000 a year, you in turn attack small businesses. And beware not of this law of syllogism, because it's real and it's been proven. When you attack those making over $200,000 a year, and in turn you attack those small businesses, you are in turn attacking the source in our government providing 70% of our jobs. 70% of our jobs. Does anyone here have a minimum wage job, or do you guys work minimum wage at all? I know that you guys don't at all. You do? Well, let me tell you, the more and more we tax these earners of over $200,000 a year, the more and more we are going to continue to hurt our private economy, and our federal government will just continue to expand. It's ironic, because the very same people who would claim that we need higher taxes on smaller business, that we need higher taxes on those making over $200,000 a year, are the same people entirely who are calling for a higher minimum wage. They're calling for a higher minimum wage. Now, I can't even begin to fathom the lack of logic in that kind of statement. To call for higher taxes on small business and at the same time call for a higher minimum wage. Well, if we weren't taxing our government, taxing our economy to the point where small business owners have almost no money left after overhead, well, then we wouldn't even have a need for a minimum wage, because we'd be able to pay our workers a lot more. And if we did have a minimum wage, well, then it wouldn't come down as hard on businesses. because they had enough of their own money to work with and reinvest into the economy. But if you are audacious enough to say that you want higher taxes on small businesses, higher taxes on those making over $200,000 a year, and in the same breath you are willing to advocate a higher minimum wage, then you are creating an impossible burden on our small businesses. Small businesses